Hey folks, that's a huge room. I expected like a small workshop thing. So anyway, I'm here to talk about engineering management. My name is Andreas Klinger. I'm the VP of engineering at a company called Colinlist. Before that, I was founding member and CTO of a company called Product Hunt. And my main goal here is just to share a bit my learnings. I will specifically focus on early stage. So it's not like 500 engineers, 50 engineers, 1,000 engineers. It's more like early stage of a company, 10 engineers, 20 engineers, this kind of size. And I hope it's useful. Okay, let's go. So first off, I have all the slides online on Twitter. So if you want to skip ahead and like just read what I'm going to say, it's all there. Also, I will just skip a few things here to keep it a little bit more compact. Everything is online. Feel free to read it on your own time. So who here knows Product Hunt? Jesus, that's a lot of people. Wow. For those who don't know Product Hunt, it's kind of imagine the App Store and Reddit have like an ugly baby. So it's essentially a website where new products get launched. So you build something amazing, you want to show it to the world. This is one of those sites where you do it. A lot of investors and journalists use it daily and so on and so on. This is what most people know of Product Hunt. It's like this landing page with like the products on it. But there's a bunch more. The deeper you get in the community, the more tools there are and so on and so on. Like it's surprisingly complex product. Everything gets surprisingly complex if you have enough funding and enough time. But anyway, this is Product Hunt. I will go a little bit later into this, but like we were acquired beginning of 2017 by a company called AngelList, which is essentially LinkedIn for startups. I highly recommend it for European people if you want to recruit remote workers. It works really well for hiring remote workers. But anyway, we were acquired beginning of 2017, and beginning of 2018, I joined a spin-out, which is Colinlist. And the shortest explanation I can give is we do crypto stuff. The main product we make money with is a compliance tool. So essentially, ICOs, we do the background checks on the investors, and we do accreditations. In America, it's quite complex who can invest into securities, and we kind of cover the legal aspects. So kind of do not go into jail as a service. And we did so far $400 to $800 million in the ICO volume onto this platform. Pretty much every big ICO in America goes through this platform. Anyway, goal of this talk, I want to share a few high-level learnings from Silicon Valley and learnings in engineering management in general. I will focus on early stage for one specific reason. In my opinion, early stage is kind of the biggest problem we have in Europe. Don't get me wrong, there's enough funding out there, but what I notice very regularly is that we do not manage to get companies big enough. And that's not only our fault, it's also we have a very fragmented market. Like if you launch in Portugal, nobody in Ukraine will know. If you launch in California or if you launch in Washington, everybody in Boston might know. So in America, you have a very different setup. You can launch something and people all over the country create a pull, like interest, and this kind of early traction just helps you a lot. Like in Product Hunt, we did so much wrong, but like just this market pull helped so much. This is why I believe in Europe we are a little bit disadvantaged and we need to by far more focus on getting early traction. But when I talk to engineering teams, early stage engineering teams in Europe, they focus much more on the technical aspects. They tell me that they use Dart, Docker, Reason, that they use Elixir, and so on and so on. Don't get me wrong, this is amazing. But if I talk to early stage teams in America, they usually focus primarily on the product and the product market fit and like this kind of discussion, like the market and all these kind of things. In my personal opinion, early stage engineering team is product team. There is no difference, there is no distinction. So anyway, early stage. The biggest learning I had is when I joined Product Hunt, and this was like before Y Combinator and before all the other craziness, one of my first tasks was to create a recommendation engine. So we had products, and we wanted to show other interesting products next to those, because most likely you want to see more like that, right? So I was smart about it. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, you know, like MVP style, lean startup, all these kind of things. First I was like, maybe we should do machine learning as a recommendation engine. But I'm smart, you know, like, no, that's an overkill. So I did a very sensible approach. I real-time pipelined all the data coming in into the database through like scripts and so on directly into an external graph database server. And there I had a few queries that basically did like, people who like that will also like that. And that kind of worked really quickly. I had a prototype working really quickly. This was amazing, and it was awesome, right? I felt like with another 4 days, I could get it to like a good enough state that we can show it to people. And with another week or week and a half, just tuning the variables, I get to the point that it's actually okay, good enough, like let's launch it. Anyway, I talked to my partner, like Ryan, who basically was like, how can we launch this like tomorrow? Can we do just like, we have like this admin interface in the background, like active admin, if anybody knows Rails, like really ugly stuff. Can we just have like a form there where I type in which product should be recommended for which other product, like literally manually? And I was like, this won't scale, this is crazy, this is madness talking right now. Anyway, I did it because like for in between, right? So I built the most basic form ever. It was literally, you type in the post IDs, like the literal numbers of the other posts you want to like, other products you want to recommend. There wasn't even type ahead or anything crazy like that. I mean, we're talking about a company that had funding of like Y Combinator, Google Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, like you name it, like everybody, And there I was like building a form that where people were forced to look up post IDs, copy paste them, go back and put them in. Anyway, we shipped it next day, we had it working. Next day, unfortunately, I had to work on something else, which was really important. I couldn't get back to this problem. Day afterwards, as well something else, I never got back to it. Anyway, we kind of got to the point that this worked. It was good enough. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't nice, but for the real like top killer products each day, we had enough good recommendations and the majority of the traffic was anyway going there. It was good enough. So we just extended that. So we added type ahead, finally. It was a big day, we celebrated. And we also enabled a few higher level people in the community to also like just suggest products, add them, and all this kind of stuff. Later on, we added like community suggestions, and then we even allowed the maker and the hunter to do it. But this was all still completely manually, right? At some point, when we like scaled, like we had the time for doing this, we want to focus on SEO, so we had a lot of pages that auto-generated recommendations, and that, of course, was like not manually anymore. But as long as we had something curated, it was on the top, obviously. Anyway, technically, this is still how the recommendation engine kind of works today. And that's quite a big site with like several 100,000 of products, and yeah, it worked at least. Like now, of course, we scaled it. Now there's technological support, but for the first years, a form with freaking post IDs, that's it. So anyway, I was somewhere between inspired and traumatized afterwards. So I kind of had this like, how can we launch this tomorrow in my head, like in there as a loop. And I started to tell to everybody we were recruiting, like if you're looking for big technological challenges, most likely this won't be the place because we will build forms where you can just type in IDs, like this is good enough. Like if it works, period. And I had this saying that everything is manually, and by accident we have servers that happen to send HTML. And if we could do that manually, we would most likely do that manually as well. Because it worked. Like it was good enough, and whenever we saw something is actually working and worth putting time in, we put in time for technology. And I told this to every new hire, and I was actually quite lucky because I managed to hire like a lot of really good people. And they kind of knew what to do. First of all of them were better programmers than I am, which is not that much of an accomplishment, but they're still amazing people, don't get me wrong. And I was in this weird situation where I hired some of the best people I know, and I really didn't want to lose them, but I also am this weird control freak that wants to make sure everything is done exactly how he believes stuff should be done. So I kind of had to work on myself and like teach myself how to do management. And most importantly, one aspect for me personally was I didn't really want to become a full-time manager, not so much because I don't think it's useful, but just because it felt wrong. It's like a really small team, and like me just sitting in meetings and telling other people what to do. I was more like leading by example, so I wanted to actually develop as well. So I became like a part-time manager in a way. And I led the tech team. So, and this is kind of what the talk is about. This is like what I want to like share here. And a few of the chapters won't fit into this now, and I just like, there's a link on Twitter, like feel free to read everything there, and I will just try to like share a few of the learnings I had. First of all, for me personally, I separate between management and leadership. And management for me means you define processes and you facilitate communication if processes fail. And leadership to me is much more about the people. So you basically want to provide a reason, like a target, like a reason to go somewhere, and you don't really want to like provide a clear path. You just want to like get people like, this is where we want to go, roughly, and this is the reason why I want to go there, and like figure it out together with them. And you kind of want to guide whenever this fails. The reason why I differ them is because you can manage processes for millions of people, like tax authorities. They manage processes for millions of people. And they exactly define what should be done and what is okay and what is not okay. All of that is perfect management, more or less perfect. But I wouldn't call tax authority classical leaders. Like, I wouldn't be inspired to stand up and say, thank you for inspiring me to me, whatever. This is not really the same. On the other hand, you can be like a leader, like a religious leader or whatever, and inspire people to do something without ever managing them. And a very classical example is you most likely have teams where you have internally people who are leaders, but they are actually technically not the manager. They're just the people internally who make stuff happen. And then very often you have people who manage, but they actually don't lead the people indirectly. So anyway, you might manage processes, but you lead people. And one thing that's very common in San Francisco, unfortunately, is this kind of we have no management attitude, like flat hierarchies and so on and so on. And don't get me wrong, it's very important to have like an egalitarian approach, but you always have management. You always have hierarchies. Sometimes they're not explicit, sometimes they're not transparent, sometimes they're not obvious, and most likely they're not fair, and absolutely most likely they're not good. But you have them in place, you have management. If you imagine going into a team that tells you that they have no management, it kind of means there's a secret hierarchy and you need to learn it on your own, nothing else. And another thing for me personally important is a manager is not the person who decides for everybody. Like the people I hired were by far better engineers than I am. I shouldn't tell them how they should implement something or which architecture to approach. I wanted to teach them how I personally decide. Because in my opinion, it's much more important to teach people how you decide than what your decision is. Because obviously next time they can use it again. There's this saying about like, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach them to fish and they have food forever. Tell them that you actually want to have regular food and they will be like, there's a supermarket, you know? So teaching how you decide is by far more important. And the other thing is what I try to do is I push the authority as close as possible to the point of action. The other thing is I do not personally believe in small teams in full-time management roles, like communication hubs, people who just tell people what other people have told them and like spread the work and all this kind of stuff and like have you done your work kind of things. I personally believe this is an anti-pattern and it's kind of showing usually process problems. Don't get me wrong, at a certain size, obviously you will do more and more of that, but if you're like below 20 people, below 30 people, it's very unlikely. For example, at AngelList, this is now like 100 people roughly. The CEO still does like sales outreach and all this kind of stuff. At Colinlist, the COO still does design. Obviously, they can't do this full-time because they have to do a lot of other stuff. And obviously, the CEO does everything he can right now to hire a second designer because he can't focus on that enough, you know? So it's obviously not, they shouldn't be responsible primarily for that, but they will still do this on the side. The same way as I, as a CTO, was still engineering as like everybody else. Also, like processes are not like 1, 2, 3, or like I tell, you tell, whatever. It's not excuse of things. It's much more expectations made explicit. So in our case, it was like we do pull requests every morning, because if you do that before you do anything else, you unblock other people. And it's also, in our case, we're a remote team. It means I go to sleep, and next day, somebody already had his morning or her morning and could review the code. So this is an explicit expectation. Like I don't need to ping people, please, please do that, because this is an explicit expectation. This is process. And of course, we had like a few others. The most important thing I learned is keep them as simple as you can, because anyway you will need to refactor them. We tend to think of organizational structures and like organizational setups as this thing that, like, if you do it right, it will work. But we kind of need to think of much more of like a code base. You wouldn't like expect an early stage product code base to do the same kind of load and the same kind of problem handling as like a later stage, like huge a million user kind of platform, right? So you would refactor along the way, you would replace parts that don't work and so on and so on. And it's the same mindset you need to have with your organization. You basically want to refactor every 6 months, and you need to, as with code, you want to wait for the problems to actually pop up. And when the real problems are here, discuss them with your team, figure out other problems, other solutions that might already have naturally emerged. The bad thing here is if you hate process problems, they don't go away. My biggest learning is when the company gets more successful and when it's growing and the company gets bigger and bigger, you do not lose problems, you just replace them. Like, it kind of stays the same weird way as it was in the beginning. You just replace them along the way. And it's just a thing you have to accept. And the most important thing here is I tend to get very emotional. Like, I was very frustrated with the people that, like, we agreed on stuff and it doesn't work and whatever. You need to differ here, and you need to realize that actually people and context equals output. And that basically means you can take an amazing person, put them in a bad context, and they will perform horrible. And the same is true, for example, with the process. If the processes don't no longer work, you need to, of course, refactor them, and you need to, like, in your head, always split between those things. This is also useful if you need to, for example, give feedback to engineers, like performance feedback and all this kind of stuff. If you focus on the context, it's much more easy to actually analyze what's wrong in a context than to figure out, like, what's wrong with a person. Because usually a person, if they're motivated, they want to do their best. They're just somehow blocked, right? Anyway, and this in the end is so much about people in the like in details here, and it's so much about like how much does their life and their setup actually fit to the way the company works, and this is where leadership basically summarizes for me. So, in detail here, the most important thing to me here is it's not so much about them in their current job. Of course, this is what you want. But what they want is to have a good life and a career and like a future. And like you most likely join them in their life for like, let's say 1 to 5 years, maybe 10 in extreme cases. But you kind of want to help them to build the career and the life they want. And this is a human thing. This is person to person. This is also where one-on-ones come in. Like a lot of people use one-on-one for project updates. I think this is an anti-pattern. You kind of want to have project meetings for that kind of stuff, and if it's only you two, it's only you two. And the one-on-one is just for this one person, and it's only like whatever this one person wants to talk about. And you need to figure out, like, kind of like open up the book and figure out what problems are actually happening. So, this is the, for me personally, the hardest one. I think everybody here has been in a company or is in a company where you make a decision and all of a sudden everybody adds their 2 cents. Then you finally make a decision. Then it's getting kind of changed and changed again and so on and so on. And then actually the CEO has a different vision a week later, right? This is a very common problem, and this is where you lose 89, 90% of the productivity. Oops. The classical one is like, this is like the typical hierarchy diagrams we have in our head, and this is already like by default really weird because like the important person is in the top and the less important people are in the bottom, although they actually work with your product, although they actually work with your customer and so on, although they're most likely the most competent people about your customer, about your problem, about your product, right? And in our language we say somebody is above somebody else. Like this by itself is already broken, right? But the question here is like, who decides anything here? And the perfect answer to this, obviously, is like, ideally the people as close as possible. Like they should decide as much as possible. They should decide everything, right? At AngelList, we have the saying, "She who codes decides," which also means, for example, if you are one of the previous engineers, tough luck. She's now programming this, so it's her decision in the end. But this is obviously not true in all situations. You have kind of different layers of decisions, and ideally, the majority of this stuff is like happening directly with the project team, but like there's obviously stuff bubbling up. A good framing to that is like, it should be strategic decisions on the top and implementation operative decisions on the bottom. And the best framework for this is, in my opinion, OKR. So basically, as a CEO or CTO, you define what is the goal of this year or this quarter as a company, like all of us together with all of our 5 different products, platforms, features, whatsoever. And then each of these teams try to come up with their own, we believe this kind of strategy is the right approach, with this kind of feature changes, this kind of product, and this is how we're going to measure it. If you're not using OKRs, I personally would highly recommend it. This is a situation that, just to explain the problem, like this is a situation that obviously did never really happen at Product Hunt. Spoilers, it totally did. So we had a designer who wanted to fundamentally change a good part of the iOS app and basically introduce a new kind of UX flow, which was completely against every best practice guideline of Apple whatsoever, like horrible. Every engineer in the team hated it, obviously. And especially the engineer who was the project lead of this hated it, he hated the guts out of it. everybody else had an opinion, everybody else added their opinions, and especially the CEO, like, this is a waste of time, let's not do it, and all this kind of stuff. So in reality, I pushed down and basically asked the project team to decide. The project lead here was against it, but the designer, from our point of view, still had like the ownership over UX, right? Like he actually knows what they're doing, and we hire people for good judgment. If they do bad decisions, we fire them, period. So we kind of hope that we have people who make good decisions already in-house. So we tried to reformulate this as a risk question, which essentially means how much risk are we willing to take, and what is, like, in this case, for example, a prototype that you can do. Like in this case, it was like a commitment of, I think, 1.5 weeks or 1 week, something like that, to build a prototype and get this into users' hands and like just see if it actually changes anything, if it actually works the way we imagine it. We managed to do this a little bit quicker because we decided not to implement it, but use like UX prototyping tools. And it actually performed better. And when we shipped it, it also actually performed better. Unfortunately, a few months later, we needed to completely remove it. So the designer was right, and he got his way, and everything was amazing, and we figured out how to do this decision. In the end, he still decided to remove it, I think, like 2.5 months later in a new release, because it didn't work with the other stuff he wanted to do. But just to go back, this is how I personally believe decisions should be approached. If the CEO wants to do an intervention, like if the CEO or the CTO says, like, we cannot do this for strategic reasons, that's completely okay and needs to be discussed. But like, this whole of this here is not so much about the people, because they are okay with making their own decisions. They love it. Like that's easy. It's much more about you yourself as the manager, because you as a manager, you always have opinions. You always have like this urge to tell people what your experience tells you, or like you're pretty sure it's like that way, and so on and so on. So it's much more about yourself. And the problem, or like the challenge with a manager is, by default, you obviously want to support the team, right? Like by default, you just want to say, you do what you think is right, your call, go ahead. And in a lot of situations, you're at this point where you want to explain why you believe something different. And this is a very dangerous moment, because your opinion as a founder or as a manager has a lot of weight. So by default, you will say something, and they will take it and already consider it differently than if, I don't know, Brian from accounting told them, right? So they will already like treat it very differently. So you need to be very, very careful how you frame opinions, and ideally don't tell them like what, but more like the why and the how and all these kind of things. What I usually try to do is I kind of ask to be proven wrong, not to them, like I didn't tell them prove me wrong, you know, because it's a kind of an asshole thing to say, but like to myself. I said like, okay, I believe I'm right, but I will say, like, let them prove me wrong. But I insisted on a proof, which essentially just meant, like, how can we reformulate this to a risk discussion? How can we say, like, how much risk are we willing to take? How can you prove me that this is right? The other very important thing is, sooner or later, you can't just test everything, jump around and whatsoever. You just, like, disagree, but you commit. Because if they're wrong, they're anyway the poor souls who have to fix it. So they anyway are, like, trapped and, like, need to fix and get it working, you know? If you need to do interventions, and I call them intentionally interventions, it's not like decisions, it's interventions. If you need to do interventions and you happen to do them regularly, you most likely have a process problem. So if it happens that the manager constantly needs to override decisions, you have a process problem. There's something else wrong. Maybe you didn't teach them how you think about problems, maybe you didn't have the time for that, or you didn't do it properly, but there's some problem. And at all costs, avoid drive-by management. This is the classical thing of like the CEO coming to the office, listening about something 10 minutes, saying, no, we're doing the other thing, and then moving on and driving away. This is literally equivalent of like somebody driving by with a car, like Uzi, you know, shooting everybody dead, driving away. This is literally the same thing, because in very often cases, the project is completely derailed afterwards. So this is the number one thing you kind of want to avoid with this process. I'm no longer used to European drinks. I'm sorry. Anyway, engineering team performance. And this and the next one I will kind of skim. It's all online, like feel free to read it there. First of all, if your team is too slow, it's never a people problem. It's never a bandwidth problem. You don't need to hire 20 more people. You have a prioritization problem. Everything is important. You have a prioritization problem. You can't figure out what is most important, and you can't figure out how to test it or like how to simplify it and how to reduce it to a way that's small enough. Speed doesn't come from fast working. I know we have this feeling that all Americans work crazy hours. It's bullshit, honestly. I know teams in Vienna and in all over Europe, in Eastern Europe, that work by far harder than most Americans I know. The main difference they have is culturally, they talk more about it and they make a bigger show about it. Okay, and that's a thing that's just like a little bit different in culture. Of course, Silicon Valley and Bay Area has a little bit more of a tendency of attracting those that really want to work, obviously. But by default, it's pretty much the same. So it's not the fast work, it's not the hustling. It's figuring out what you should work and establishing confidence in the team, that the team can actually move ahead faster and faster. And what I call is optimizing for single player. The reason why I call it this way is because, first of all, Product Hunt is a distributed team, so like there's a literal chance that somebody will sit alone and need to figure it out on their own, because nobody else is online. But also because, in a way, team input-output is the slowest thing you can do. Asking somebody and waiting for their reply can take hours. Like figuring out, like sending them like a pull request or whatever, this can take hours. Like this kind of stuff, input-output is the slow thing. Every competent person is usually fast and motivated. So you kind of want to remove these unsure moments and these things. And this is the part where I got like a little bit faster, if it's okay with you guys. Number one, automate literally everything. Get all discussions you don't need out of the way. We have the aggressive linters. They obviously code style, but more importantly, complexity. So it's literally impossible to ship too complex code. You can ship bad architecture, obviously, that can happen, but this happens in an average day, this happens rarely. The same is like with security tests and so on, and pull request enforcement, like test enforcement and pull request and all this kind of like making sure it's done the way you want it to be done. All of this can be done automatically. And we do this not only to avoid the work, but also have like new employees, give them the opportunity that they can learn and improve without somebody else telling them like you did this wrong, you did here, because this is a really annoying phase when you join a company. You know, when you're like the idiot and everybody tells you you're doing stuff wrong, that's like a horrible phase. And if you automate as much as possible, good things happen. Also, you can add it to your editor, and who hasn't worked with automatic code reformatting in your editor, game changer, please do it. Anyway, other stuff, we use feature flags like extensively. We use demo instances extensively. We use production database dump sanitized, obviously, extensively. All these kind of things to just enable any person to learn and do on their own and easily show stuff. And also ship. The nice thing about feature flags is it feels very okay to ship something kind of broken to 1% of your audience. You would never ship it, but like 1% of your audience, yeah, sure, let's get some numbers in it, like see if this works, right? And then you improve it and you increase it to like 5%, you know? And this also helps if you have internally, for example, product managers who are really like, no, this needs to be perfect. You reformulate this to a risk discussion here again, because you say, is it okay if we ship it to 10%? And as soon as you actually ship it, even if it's just to 10%, it changes the discussion. Like you already have it out there, and now it's about improving, you know? So if you have this problem of like product managers being a little bit too, this helps. The same is like future worst cases, automate, document, and so on and so on. The other one is obviously meetings. Developers hate meetings, not because meetings are not useful, because most meetings are not useful. And if you don't set meetings up right, if you don't make the meeting actually not about like them reporting to you, but you actually, as a manager, allocating time, like I have, like you need me Tuesday at this time, I have an hour for you guys blocked, or for you people blocked, and it's your time, your agenda, you tell me what you need, and we get everybody involved. Obviously, you want to have notes and all this kind of stuff shared, because you don't want to create a FOMO, like if I don't join the meeting, I don't know what's going on. You want to like communicate to everybody, so all these kind of things. Code-based management, this is a bigger part. I skip it for the live talk if it's okay with you guys, because I want to get to the end and answer some questions if you're cool with this. TLDR, treat organization like software, which means small units, ownership, documentation, refactoring, testing for acceptance, re-evaluating best practices, because guess what, they might not be yours. And most importantly, treating people as capable, intelligent adults. I feel like I need to say this like 5 times. Like it's the most important thing. If you hire the best possible people, you want to give them the opportunity to actually do the thing they're good in. They use their own like knowledge. You don't want to micromanage people because you will lose them because if you do that. And as a positive note in the end, any problem in your company as a manager, and this is like where I get like a little bit more upbeat, is ultimately your fault. There's never a fault of somebody else. Either you messed up the process, or you messed up like guiding them or mentoring them, or you messed up something else, or worst case, you were one of the people who actually hired this person. So no matter what, it's kind of your fault in the end. So you need to learn what you can do to improve for the next time. And thanks, that's it for me. Also, a quick one. If you miss each other here, like feel free to send me messages on Twitter, like DM. I answer everything. I'm more than happy. Any questions?
We had one question from Slido. If there is no critical mass to make a product viable, how do you get that posted?
Which question are you reading?
The first one.
Okay.
Always starting at the top.
Okay.
Prioritization.
Who wrote this question?
Anonymous.
Okay. What do you mean with like product posted?
If you have product hunt.
Yeah.
So if you have product hunt and you obviously need a bunch of products in order for people to be interested in the product, how do you get how do you get your first product posted?
Yeah, makes sense. So the main question here is, if I understand it correctly in my words, is you have a product and you might not have the critical mass in the beginning. How do you get to the critical mass that it actually works by itself, right? So in my opinion, it's narrowing the scope and cheating as much as you can. So narrowing the scope means have a very specific target group in the beginning. So for example, in our case, it was a community play so that these people actually get value out of each other, that the products that get posted are like, interesting for them. But if you, for example, do like a workflow tool, you want to like focus on, or like a management tool or whatever, you want to focus on a certain target group so that there's like a word of mouth propaganda and all this kind of thing, and you can solve the use case really well for them in the beginning. So you don't have to focus on everybody's needs, but like these specific needs, right? And this is how you kind of build up a critical mass. And the other aspect is cheating in a way. So for example, if you do like a community product, you kind of want to push people in the beginning to actually contribute work. So we had like a lot of access to highly influential people, and we kind of like pulled them into discussions. We tried to just like tell people via email, hey, please like talk here. Like somebody asked a question related to this. Like a lot of hand-holding, and sometimes just in our case ourselves asking questions and like interacting, like making sure it's like 1% of engagement is always happening. For other products, SaaS, it's just like appear bigger than you are and like all these kind of things.
It's very hard to get to the moment when you breathe. To interrupt you. Second question, maybe the last question for today. What's your thought on career ladders and titles like the Senior Vice President of Facilities and that stuff?
So I usually say I'm a janitor with a title. Titles are, in our case, not really useful internally. I can't go into a meeting and say, no, I insist I'm the VP. Like, the fuck? Like, come on. Won't work. Most likely gets me fired, actually. So we use titles externally. That's pretty much the only reason we have them. We also try to have as few titles as possible, because sooner or later you hire more senior people and you want to like, keep space. For people internally, it's not so much, in my opinion, it's not so much about career in the sense of titles. It's much about learning. So usually people have like a thing that's interesting to them. So if, for example, an engineer wants to learn more product stuff or more like this kind of things, UX problems. So how can you enable them to actually go more in this direction? Or somebody wants to do like more harder tech challenges. Like how can you enable them to go this direction? This is usually what you want to focus on, and not so much like improving the title, because anybody who hires somebody who worked in a 50-people company knows that the senior VP of whatever, that's a made-up title, you know.
So fantastic. Thank you, Andreas, for this talk.